Sara Gilbert's name is instantly tied to one of the most iconic sitcoms, All the 9S. Yet, her journey has been far from easy. Behind the quick wit and sharp humor that define her roles lies a life shaped by loneliness, difficult relationships, and battles with her own identity. From the moment she stepped into the spotlight as a child, she faced pressures that few could understand. And while her talent made her unforgettable, the personal costs were devastating. This is the story of Sara Gilbert, Astria's struggle, survival, and resilience of a childhood surrounded by Hollywood, but filled with struggles. Sara Gilbert was born Sarah Rebecca Bellis on January 29, 1975, in Santa Monica, California. Show business was already in her blood. Her grandfather, Harry Crane, had been the creator of The Honeymooners, a legendary sitcom that defined early American television comedy. Her mother, Barbara Cowan, was a talent manager and producer, and her older half-siblings, Melissa and Jonathan Gilbert, had already become household names thanks to their roles on Little House on the Prairie. With so many connections around her, Sara was inevitably drawn toward the world of acting. But even in a family so tied to entertainment, life was not easy. Her biological father, Harold Abels, had once been a successful lawyer, but after his divorce from Barbara, his finances and personal stability crumbled. He later turned to Sara for help when she was still only a teenager earning a large salary on television. She described the situation as heartbreaking. At just 18, she was making more money than most adults. But instead of being able to lean on her father, she was the one being leaned upon. For a while, she gave him money, but as the request continued, she felt drained and conflicted. Eventually, she stopped only to later regret it and returned to care for him in his final years when illness overtook him. That complicated bond with her father would stay with her forever, shaping her view of family, responsibility, and guilt. At the same time, school itself was a source of unhappiness for Sara. She admitted later that she never really loved being in a normal classroom, and that she often felt miserable as a child. Acting was her escape, a way to survive an otherwise painful daily routine. By the age of 5, she had already appeared in a Kool-Aid commercial, and she remembered the joy of finally being in an environment where creativity mattered more than grades. It gave her hope at a time when she felt trapped, and she would later say that acting saved her life. Fame arrives too early that in 1988, at only 13 years old, Sara Gilbert's life changed forever. She landed the role of Darlene Connor on Roseanne, a character who would become one of the most beloved in American television. Darlene was sarcastic, politically aware, and artistic, a reflection of many of Sara's own traits. For 9 years, she grew up on screen. Her transformation from child to teenager unfolding in front of million-saw viewers every week. The show was an instant hit, capturing the struggles of a working-class family in a way that felt raw and authentic, and Sara's performance earned her critical praise. She even won 3 Young Artist Awards and received 2 Emmy nominations in the early 1990s. But fame at that age carried its own quiet tragedy. Sara described herself as shy, withdrawn, and often uncomfortable with the attention that came with her role. While most teenagers could go through their awkward years privately, Sara had to endure on camera with the weight of public expectations pressing down on her. She once admitted that being a famous teenager was a strange contrast. On one hand, adored by millions, on the other still wrestling with the normal feelings of loneliness and insecurity that every young person faces. The spotlight didn't erase those struggles, it magnified them. Even as her career soared, education became another uphill battle. When she enrolled at Yale in 1993, she was determined not to let academics slip away. But balancing school and her career was grueling. Each week, she flew from New York back to Los Angeles to film her scenes for Roseanne, then return on a re-dive flight to Connecticut to make it talkless on Monday mornings. She lived on a cycle of exhaustion, her life split between 2 worlds, never fully able to tourist in either. The producers of Roseanne even adjusted schedules to accommodate her studies, filming her scenes separately in New York when possible. For many, that would have been a dream. But for Sara, it was yet another reminder that her life was never truly her own. By the time Roseanne ended in 1997, Sara had lived through almost a decade of being on one of the most watched shows in America. But she carried with her a deep fatigue and uncertainty. She had survived childhood fame, but she had also lost something in the process, the chance to grow up out of the spotlight. And as she entered adulthood, the struggles only grew more personal. Love, identity, and a secret kept too long. During her teenage years on Roseanne, Sara Gilbert found herself drawn to her co-star Johnny Galecki, who played David Healy, Darlene's on-screen boyfriend. Off-screen, the two began dating, and for a while, it seemed like the perfect match. Sara later admitted she had a crush on him, and that they would spend time together, making out like any teenage couple. But each time she grew physically closer to him, she would fall into sudden spells of depression. At first, Johnny couldn't understand what was happening. For Al Man, it felt personal like air rejection. Eventually, Sara confronted the truth that she was gay, a realization that came with both clarity and fear. When she finally told Johnny, his reaction was nothing but supportive. Instead of walking away, he became one of her closest allies. Years later, when Sara was preparing to come out publicly on The Talk in 2010, she asked Johnny if she could share details of their past relationship. He gave her his blessing immediately and even offered to appear on the show to hold her hand while she told the world. Sara described his support as one of the most meaningful gifts she had ever received. Still, despite his understanding, Sara kept her sexuality hidden from the public for years. She admitted she lived in constant fear that if the truth came out, her career would be over. She worried casting directors would stop offering her straight roles and that her success on Roseanne would never be replicated. The secrecy weighed heavily on her, and even after she came out in 2010, she confessed that some of that fear lingered. Speaking openly, she said that while she tried to act confident, there was always a part of her that asked, "What is this costing me in my career?" Her fears were not entirely unfounded. Hollywood has a long history of punishing actors who don't fit its narrow view of what a star should be. Yet in Sara's case, her courage to live authentically became part of her legacy. She went on to build a family of her own, raising children while navigating the difficult path of love and loss. But even in her most personal relationships, heartbreak was never far away. Heartbreak, family, and a marriage that can't last. For nearly a decade, Sara Gilbert was in a committed relationship with television writer Allison Adler. Together, they built a family, welcoming a son, Levi Hank, in 2004, and a daughter, Sawyer Jane, in 2007 for Sara, who had spent so much of her youth hiding her true self. This period felt like a chance to live openly and embrace motherhood. But in 2011, everything unraveled. The couple split, and though public statements described it as amicable, behind the scenes, the separation was deeply painful. On The Talk, Sara broke down in tears, confessing that she no longer knew if marriage or long-term commitment was even possible. She spoke candidly about her sadness, wondering aloud how some couples managed to stay together for decades while she could not. The end of her relationship with Adler also created lasting wounds. Reports later surfaced that Allison had felt blindsided when Sara moved on quickly with musician Linda Perry, the former lead singer of Four Non-Blondes. Rumors spread that Sara had left Adler for Perry, and although neither woman publicly confirmed those details, insiders described Allison as devastated, saying it felt like the final betrayal when Sara and Linda announced their engagement. In March 2014, Sara and Linda Perry were married in a Malibu ceremony, sealing their union in what at first seemed like a fairy tale. A year later, they welcomed a son, Rhodes Emilio Gilbert Perry. For Sara, it was a new beginning, a Shancito-experienced marriage after years of doubting she would ever have the opportunity. She described the feeling of safety and commitment that came with it, saying marriage was no longer about wondering if she could deal with the relationship, but about how they would face challenges together. Yet, the fairy tale was short-lived. By 2019, after 5 years of marriage, Sara filed for legal separation, citing irreconcilable differences. The divorce was finalized in 2021, and while both women shared custody of Rhodes and maintained a cordial relationship, the heartbreak was undeniable. Linda later said in an interview that they would never not be a family. But for Sara, it was another painful reminder that love, no matter how passionate, didn't always last. The collapse of her marriage came during a time when her professional life was already under heavy strain, forcing her to balance grief at home with crisis at work. The collapse of Roseanne and the weight of public betrayal be why the mid-2000s, Sara Gilbert was not only a respected actress, but also a producer with a vision. In 2018, she helped bring back Roseanne for a revival season more than 2 decades after the show's original run. For a long-time fan, it was a nostalgic return, and the premiere drew massive ratings. Critics praise how the revival captured modern struggles while staying true to its roots. For Sara, it was also a professional triumph. After years off her work, she was once again at the center of a cultural phenomenon. But the success didn't last. Just weeks after the revival premiered, Roseanne Barr posted a racist tweet about Valerie Jarrett, a former advisor to President Barack Obama. The backlash was immediate and fierce. A BC can led the show within hours, effectively ending the revival overnight. For Sara, the situation was devastating. She quickly took to Twitter herself, condemning Roseanne's words as abhorrent and distancing the rest of the cast from the controversy. While many praised her for taking a stand, Roseanne herself reacted with fury. In interviews that followed, Barr accused Gilbert off-trail, saying Sara had destroyed her life and her career. In a particularly bitter statement, Roseanne claimed that Sara would never be satisfied until she consumed my liver with fine Cantai. What begun as a creative reunion, Old Friends ended in one of the ugliest public feuds in television history. And because Sara had been the most vocal among the cast, she bore the brunt of Roseanne's anger. Yet, ABC was unwilling to let the success of the revival vanish completely. Later in 2018, the network announced The Connors, a spin-off that continued the story of the family without Roseanne. Sara not only reprised her role as Darlene, but also served as an executive producer, helping to reshape the show's future. Still, the damage was done. The revival that had once promised to be a crowning achievement in her career had collapsed in scandal, and she was left carrying the weight of both public scrutiny and private disappointment. The collapse of Roseanne wasn't the only time Sara had to face public conflict. Behind the scenes of the talk, the daytime show she had created, another storm was brewing, one that would test her already fragile balance between personal life and professional responsibility. The talk, public scrutiny, and the battle for balance. When Sara Gilbert launched the talk in 2010, it was a bold step into unfamiliar territory. For someone who had described herself as painfully shy, taking on a daily talk show meant facing the very thing she had always feared, speaking in front of crowds and revealing pieces off her private life. But Sara forced herself into it, believing it was the only way to grow. In time, she proved she could thrive in the format. The show became a success, earning a Daytime Emmy Award in 2016, and Sara remained its driving force for 9 seasons. Still, the pressures were immense. Hosting a talk show demanded that she be open about her life in a way that made her uncomfortable. She admitted that she often worried about oversharing, and while she valued the chance to connect with viewers, the cost was high. On top of that, she was simultaneously raising 3 children and producing The Connors,